1, Aristotle begins his search for the human good, the end of political science for real. Unlike Plato, he does not begin with abstract principles, but refers immediately to the consensus view that the chief good is happiness. He does this by arguing that the general run of men, both the educated and the common man, agree with this and associate happiness with living and faring well. However, people disagree over what exactly happiness is. This is seen in the fact that people pursue different subsidiary goals such as pleasure, money, and fame in the pursuit of happiness. Importantly, it also seems to be context dependent, as the man who associates prestige with happiness when healthy will suddenly regard health as the definition of happiness when sick. So as a result, there are a range of differing opinions, and Aristotle has no plans to investigate them all individually. Rather, he, once again in contrast to Plato, says that what is required at the beginning is an unreasoned conviction. This means we cannot use deductive reasoning to arrive at a complete proof about the good. In fact, we need to begin empirically with what is evident to us. At this point, according to Aristotle, what is evident to us is that happiness is the good, which is where we should begin the inquiry. Finally, Aristotle adds, for one to investigate the nature of the good and participate in this inquiry, they must have good habits in the sense that they apply reason and thus seek wisdom. And to emphasize this, Aristotle quotes from Hesiod, explaining the importance of wisdom over ignorance, stating that he who neither knows nor lays to heart another's wisdom is a useless wight. Again, under Aristotle, it is apparent that in order to pursue the good, one must possess wisdom, and this is a core tenet borrowed from Plato. But where they differ is that Aristotle deemed it wise to look at what is evident to us, which at this stage is, first, all agree that happiness is the good. However, there is no clear definition of what happiness is, and in standard form, it looks like this. So you can see that Aristotle's challenge lies in the vagueness of the conclusion, and this now becomes his project. In chapter 5, Aristotle immediately seeks to explore some of the popular views of happiness that he signposted in the previous chapter. He begins with 4 popular views: that the good lies in pleasure, honour, wealth, or contemplation. However, he defers his discussion of the final kind of life for a later chapter, not this one. Now, Aristotle's dismissal of the life of pleasure, wealth, and honour is reasonably quick. He does not, for example, take the same time in exploring why pleasure is not the good as Plato does in the Gorgias, but he argues as follows. So, a life, according to Aristotle, lived solely in pursuit of pleasure is a slavish one, only suitable to beasts, and, as he will argue later, the human good should be something unique to humans. Therefore, as we share it with animals, a life of pleasure or enjoyment is not the chief good. Next, he moves on to the life of political honour or status. However, he dismisses this as well, as he states that the good is something of our own making and should be difficult to take from us. The life of honour and status, however, depends on honour bestowed by others rather than on our own actions, and thus this lack of ownership means that the life of honour is not the chief good. And at this point, Aristotle also briefly considers the life of virtue, and also dismisses it as a candidate for the chief good, as it is compatible with being asleep, and in the process confusing many students who know that virtue, or arete, is part of his conception of human flourishing. So this seems strange. However, what Aristotle means here is that the life of virtue is incomplete insofar that it is not the mere possession of virtue, which one can have even when asleep, but its exercise or actualization, which he will identify with happiness. In other words, this is the first expression in the text of his central idea that happiness is not an ontological state of existence where one feels content, but an activity, something that one does. And he will go on to explain the role of virtue in much more detail in chapter 8. Finally, Aristotle dismisses the life of wealth by using his argument from infinite regress, who we're familiar with from chapter 2, I think. As wealth is always pursued for the sake of something else, and the chief good must be pursued for its own sake, a life in pursuit of wealth is not the chief good. Wealth is merely useful. And so after dismissing pleasure, honour, the mere possession of virtue, and wealth as candidates for the chief good, Aristotle continues his inquiry and his search in chapter 7.